From the Opopco Studios in Oklahoma City, you are watching The Press Row. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Barry Trammell. Time for our inbox. Questions from email, answered here on video. Barry, let's get right to it with a question from Greg. Greg says, which Stoops is in charge in Norman? Has Mike assumed the status of a latter-day Cardinal Richelieu? And you might want to let everybody know who in the heck we're talking about here.
We're talking about the French guy that sort of took over for the king, and that's what Greg wants to know. Is Mike running the show at the expense of his head coach brother Bob? The answer is no, but it's fascinating. I mean, it looks like next season there's going to be 5 members of the coaching staff that will have been part of the OU staff just 2 years ago, 2011. There's going to be 3 members of the staff who were part of the Arizona staff at the start of 2011. Mike has brought in Tim Kish, of course. Looks like perhaps another staff member, or even perhaps more, going to be replacing some of the fired coaches. So it's interesting. It does seem like Mike is exerting quite a bit of influence on Bob, not just in defensive alignment, which, considering the way the Sooners played defense last year, may not be a bad thing. But no, it's interesting. I think Bob seems to be sort of circling the wagons, and definitely on that inner circle is brother Mike.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you talk about assistants that were at Arizona. It'd be one thing if all those guys coming in were defensive. You could understand if Mike was hiring his defensive assistants to come in, and those were sort of his calls to bring those guys in. But it looks like Bill Bedenbaugh is going to be coaching the offensive line. So we've got a guy that isn't in the defensive rooms who's been hired from that Arizona staff. So I don't think it means that Mike's in charge by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're seeing these firings as evidence that Bob is still very much in charge. But it does look like Mike's fingerprints are clearly on this program, and Bob's allowing that to happen. Let's go back to the inbox, and this one from Rob. Rob says, whatever happened to Trey McGuire? He had that big spring game last year that had everybody thinking he was the next coming of Ryan Broyles. Then he did relatively nothing during the regular season, Barry.
Well, here's what happened to him. Downtown Justin Brown happened. Just receivers falling out of the sky on OU. Justin Brown from Penn State, one of them, knocked McGuire out of the starting lineup at split end, and frankly, there's only so many balls to go around. And so Jalen Saunders, same way, got in from Fresno State, got eligible midway through. So you had already Kenny Stills. Sterling Shepard was a good solid freshman. So all of a sudden, McGuire, ranked number 4, 5, even 6 on the pecking order when he was going to be 1, 2, 3, somewhere in there. So he just had to wait his turn. And Justin Brown was a senior. He's gone. I fully expect McGuire to come in, play a bunch, catch a lot of balls. Will he be a star? I don't know. I thought he was going to be. This time, after the spring game last April, I thought this guy's going to be a star. He still could be, but we'll just have to see.
Its stardom sort of stopped. I mean, I definitely thought after seeing him in the spring game, there was no reason to think that this guy couldn't be a freshman All-American, maybe even an All-American. He had that kind of ability shown in that spring game. But I tell you, not only were there less balls to catch in games, but there were less balls to catch in practice. And when you're a true freshman like Trey McGuire was a year ago, practice time's really important. And he didn't get nearly the reps, and we saw that play out. Some very basic things that he should have been able to do when he did get playing time, like stay in bounds, that was not there. So I think part of that was the problem. He just wasn't getting the reps in practice. That should start to change as some of those guys have now left off that receiving corps. Back to the inbox, this one from Lynn. Lynn says, I was dismayed reading about wrestling potentially being removed from the Olympics. I noticed that among the criteria were ticket sales and TV viewing. Is this another example of money's control over sports?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, money controls big-time sport. We know all that. But I also think there's some political stuff going on because, for one thing, this came out of the blue. Wrestling didn't even know that it was on the chopping block, didn't even know it was potentially going to be cut. So, also the IOC decided to take on a sport that's very popular among the U.S. Olympic Committee, the Russian Federation, and the Iranians. You get the Iranians and the Americans standing step in step on anything, and all of a sudden you've got yourself something. That's why I think wrestling still has a fighting chance to survive. Just because how many things in the world can get America and Iran standing together and working together? In some ways, this is a ping pong diplomacy going back to the early 70s. It's one of the few things we have that can bring people together. appeal to the IOC on that, you might have a fighting chance.
Well, in sports that we've seen discontinued in the past, one of the arguments is that a small number of countries really monopolize the success. I mean, if you look at softball, the United States really at the top of that list, Japan, it was a small group of teams that could really compete. But Barry, as you wrote after this decision came down from the IOC, if you look at the countries that won Olympic medals in this last Olympics, it's all over the board. It's the US, it's Russia, it's Azerbaijan, it's Puerto Rico. I mean, this is a sport that has success all over the world. So I think if the IOC looks at some of this and thinks about what it's done before, it may reverse course. I don't know if they do or not, but it seems like that's one thing that if wrestling argues, they might get going in their favor.
I'm impressed that you can pronounce Azerbaijan, which
you.
I did not do well.
Thank you very much. Back to the inbox for one last time. This one comes from Steve. Steve says, the observation that scoring 55 points with OSU-type talent, that it might even be easier than doing that at Shippensburg or wherever, seems to be a point that most in the mainstream media miss. Barry, this was a point you made when the news of Mike Yurcich's hiring came about.
Yeah, I mean, the guy put up unbelievable numbers at Shippensburg, and yeah, he's playing against Division II defenses, but he's also playing with Division II offenses. So he's not playing with an NFL quarterback or NFL receivers. So, I mean, I think it's when you look at execution and fundamentals and getting repetition and, pass here, pass there, pinpoint offense, to me, that's not easy on the lower levels because the type of athletes you have, it's at a place like Oklahoma State, it's easier to do that. So I don't think we can dismiss Mike Yurcich and his success at Shippensburg just because it came at a lower level.
I had a chance to talk to Trevor Harris, who played quarterback at Edinboro for Yurcich. He was there for 5 years, and Harris was his quarterback for 4 of those 5 years. And Harris really made an interesting point that I think should carry some weight with Oklahoma State fans. He said, Harris told me that when he came into college, he'd really played the wing T, and that was kind of his offensive, knowledge was just of that. And he said, Yurcich really developed him and helped him learn more offensive philosophy, helped him develop as a quarterback. He now plays for the Argonauts in the Canadian Football League, spent some time in some NFL camps. So here's a guy who's, relatively unknown, relatively unheralded, goes to Edinboro, which is the same level as Shippensburg, and becomes a guy that's playing Canadian League football. To me, Barry, that says something about this guy's ability to develop and teach. And to me, that's also something, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you got to like the potential of this guy coming in and teaching these Oklahoma State offensive guys how to do it. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.